And the moderator for this session is Dr. Stephen Rose. Oh, Mr., sorry. No, I'm kidding. Stephen Rose from Render Networks. So would you join me in welcoming Stephen to the stage?
All right, excellent. Thanks, everybody. So we've got three fantastic panelists as well. So Dr. Rick Maynard, co-founder and CEO at US Ignite. Dr. Maynard leads US Ignite, where he leads across government, industry, universities, and communities to test, deploy, and scale advanced technologies that address real-world challenges and create new opportunities for innovation. So please welcome Dr. Nick Maynard. And then we've got Peter Voderberg, Chief at BroadbandOhio. Peter leads BroadbandOhio, where he has helped shape Ohio's broadband strategy and oversee state and federal investments designed to expand connectivity and turn infrastructure into meaningful economic and community outcomes. Welcome, Peter. And then indeed, we have Brandy Reitter. Brandy is Executive Director at Colorado Broadband Office. Brandy leads the Colorado Broadband Office, overseeing statewide broadband strategy and investment with a focus on expanding connectivity and ensuring communities can translate infrastructure into lasting economic and social opportunity. Welcome, Brandy. All right, excellent. All right, so should we all take a pew here?
Oh, here, I'll sit.
Great, there's another one here.
Right there.
Okay, wonderful. Is that on? Okay. Excellent. All right, so look, we're going to try and run this, in a pretty relaxed fashion. We've got a whole bunch of questions here, but, we're also going to encourage everybody to, if you have a question mid-session, we all agreed that, well, you weren't there, but we did agree on your behalf that we will actually take questions ad hoc as well. So if there's something that you really want to dive into, we're going to start out a little bit more practically, look at some of the opportunities around the intersection of network technology and AI technology, and then as we progress into the discussion further and further, we'll get more and more and more, visionary in the way we talk to the topic. And so, again, if you have a question, query, problem, please feel free. So I'm going to start actually out with you, Peter. If we think for the last several years, focus has understandably been on deployment, miles of fiber, homes passed, people connected, but connectivity itself isn't the outcome, naturally. The question now is, what can we do with it? So you made the point that fiber by itself doesn't do anything, and I think that's a fair comment. As states move closer to universal connectivity, what problems become solvable when we combine the infrastructure with connected devices, data, and AI?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Come on. Woo! I know it's after lunch. We got to be energetic. We're going to try to keep this going. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to do something. We're going to have a little bit of audience participation as part of my answer really quickly. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Everybody in this room, I want you to raise your hand if you have high-speed internet access in your house at home right now. Go ahead and raise your hands. Put them up. All right? Yeah, pretty much everybody. Now I want you to do something else. I want you to imagine your dream job. And I know everyone in this room has their dream job, okay? But imagine a separate dream job that you don't currently hold. And I want you to hold that in your head. And now I'm going to say this. Imagine that tomorrow I could wave a magic wand and I could give you your dream job, but you had to live in a house that had no high-speed internet access at all. I want you to raise your hand if you take the job. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So first off, even the people who raised your hands, you're lying. You were thinking about it. You want high-speed internet access to your house. I'm just kidding. But I also want to point out that the majority of you didn't raise your hands. And the reason I always point this out is because everyone in this room already knows how much the internet affects your lives. You already know how much you use the internet on a daily basis, that even when faced with the opportunity of getting your dream job, you wouldn't take it because you would be away from the other parts of your life that are important, the way you talk to your family, the way you communicate, the way you maybe learn, watching Netflix, playing Xbox, whatever the thing is that you do. You couldn't live without that, and you would prefer that over your dream job, right? And the reason I say this is that's just for people who don't necessarily need anything beyond that. My son has cerebral palsy, he is blind, and he is in a wheelchair. He cannot open his front door to his house by turning a key. So when he wants to open the door, he goes, "Hey Siri, unlock the door," and Siri unlocks the door for him. For him, that's telehealth. That's an assistive living device that allows him to get in and out of that house that he needs to be able to go and just live where he wants to live, right? We have telehealth groups that utilize devices all through your house. Devices that know whether you are in bed or fell out of bed. Devices that know whether you've opened the refrigerator or turned on the faucet, right? And those devices allow you to age or live in place when you wouldn't have been able to otherwise, because someone can monitor you and be like, "Hey, Cindy hasn't gotten out of bed and the refrigerator door hasn't opened and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not like her. We should do a wellness check and go make sure she's okay." Right? We have pacemakers that will notify through the internet whether or not you've had a heart fibrillation. We have devices that allow you to track your blood pressure and your insulin and blood sugar levels that are connected to the internet that through my chart tell your doctor whether you are healthy on a given day, right? All of those things are what make the internet useful to people, even beyond the things that most of us in this room take for granted on a daily basis. So like you said, I normally say like internet by itself doesn't do anything, right? Like if you have a telephone line and no one to call, no one cares, right? But so the big thing about the internet and what we're going to see as a next step is how do we use the internet, and I'm going to focus on telehealth, which is what we all talked about, but how we use the internet to allow people to do things like age in place, right? How we allow people who have disabilities to live in a home instead of having to live in an institution. How we make sure that people who may have Alzheimer's or other disorders, that they're being checked up on and are allowed to stay in neighborhoods instead of necessarily having to be institutionalized, right? That's what the internet's going to do from us, or for us, as we continue to get everybody connected. Because all the things I just mentioned, if you live in Appalachia, Ohio today, most of those things you can't do because you don't have an internet connection in your house. And so what we're looking forward to is once we actually build the infrastructure and everybody in the Appalachian region has that infrastructure available to them, all of those possibilities all open up for all of those people to be able to just live their lives in the way that they need to live their lives where they want to live.
That's great, thanks. And Brandy, turning to you, I mean, we've got, enormous investments going into the infrastructure and into communities. But when you think about what else needs to be in place to make sure that we're really innovating at scale and for economic growth, what do you think about beyond just faster connectivity? What are the conditions for success that we need to build?
Yeah, I think so that's a great question, and yeah, I wasn't there, but I'm going to wing it a little bit. And some of these conversations I've had over and over again, and if I had my dream job, I would be running the Starship Enterprise. But so it's not an in-house internet situation; it's in space. Thank you, Peter. So yeah, I think what we also need, in addition to high-speed internet and deployment and infrastructure to enable AI, is we have to have. And this goes back to like skilling people up to use the internet. Like how do you use the internet to implement these technologies and the education around it and bringing people up to speed once they have access. One thing that I happened to me, real world example last year, is just the different levels of education and sophistication around, now that you have high-speed internet, this is what you can do. I live in a rural community. Thankfully, it's about 30 minutes west of Vail. I had to go to the hospital, and it wasn't a big deal. I didn't die. I was fine. But I have lived in a community without high-speed internet, and what that looks like. And I live in a community now, still rural, that has high-speed internet, and the differences in care and education and patient support is incredible when you have high-speed internet that enables medical devices that connect testing, really really sophisticated testing, and the workforce and skilling just around that. And those individuals that can use the internet to implement those AI technologies and really robust, sophisticated medical devices, they actually even enable access across the region. So you're really tapping into specific individuals that have a higher concentration and sophistication around AI and enabling that type of technology that then the other regions benefit from, because a lot of these doctors, they travel around. And then also, just to contrast that, when I was in another community, the level of care was different. They couldn't diagnose things. They had to go send me out to other places that were areas where they had high-speed internet around medical care. And those drives and those commutes and the delay in care it's really detrimental to rural communities. And so when you start to educate people around how to use the internet to enable AI deployments, AI technology around even just medical care, the whole region benefits. So it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all ships. So that's kind of how I see it. I think you have to have internet, but you have to make people aware of how they can use that high-speed internet for other technology.
And Nick, to you, these are great examples of, what is actually happening, but there's a lot of ecosystem sort of coordination, but we're not seeing enough of it, frankly speaking. So when you think about, other signs that you're seeing that are suggesting that we're actually going to be able to add value beyond just basic levels of connectivity and speeds and feeds, what are you seeing that suggests that we are learning as we go along this journey?
Yeah, what I would say is, when we launched US Ignite over 10 years ago, our mission was really focused on underserved communities, helping them with their broadband strategies. That evolved with that question of what can you do with it once it's in place. And so we spent a lot of time identifying best practices across different regions across the country, over 70 of them, working with them to identify common challenges that they're working with against, whether that's fiber deployment or wireless deployment, sensor deployment, thinking through what are the priorities that you want to wrestle with first. When you talk with a city or a state or local stakeholders, they will list out 5 or 10 different ideas that they want to start first on. So we try and say, well, let's pick 1 or 2. Those are all great ideas, but let's pick 1 or 2 to start. Let's find other communities that have done this before. Let's understand what challenges they've run into. Let's try and avoid some of those pitfalls along the way, and then connect them with a national, we have internal expertise, so engineers and data scientists, economists, other folks like that. But then we have a national network of folks constantly trying to plug our communities into so they can also learn from those past mistakes. And so we are over 10 years in, we are starting to see an ecosystem start to build, exactly to your point. A lot more work still has to be done to really prove out the viability of some of these AI-based energy or transportation or public safety use cases.
Yeah, and just as a following question to you on this, because all of these technologies that are intersecting and sort of adding value to each other, whether it be network and then AI, and then you've got a lot of sort of observability technology that needs to be there, but they're all operating and they're all being developed in innovation cycles that don't necessarily match. How on earth do you keep up with all of that? How do you know what the next iteration of AI is and whether agentic is real or whether it's something that we keep talking about agentic AI, but the reality is that probably 2% of the software in the world is agentic AI so far. Right. So, how do you just keep abreast of all of that?
Yeah, I think what we try and do is work with a wide range of partners, so that whether they're academic researchers, startups, the cities themselves, we create a safe environment for them to test and evaluate those AI-based technologies, whether they are drones or energy sensors or traffic sensors or things like that. And then we're testing and evaluating how much money is saved, how many lives are saved over the course of not just the 1 week, but many months or sometimes even years. And so to really prove out the viability and the cost savings and the lives saved of these different approaches to demonstrate really does take a long-term commitment from all the different stakeholders over that time period. And that's really what US Ignite's role is of being that linchpin in that push.
Yeah, and Peter, you gave aging in place as a great example. I think that's a wonderful thing. Who wants to be stuck in a care home, before too soon, right? So, but the problem again there is that requires us to have an intersection of technologies that really move us out of, reaction to prediction, in fact, yeah. And obviously you've got a great case at home, and in fact, my father had 9 heart attacks, and he lived in France, in rural France, and I couldn't observe particularly well when he was ill. All I could do was respond, and particularly because I was living in a different country, so it was very hard to keep up with that, and I could see how technologies would be able to solve for that problem. But it also meant that you had to break down barriers of, data and NEPA, data privacy issues and whatever else. So, how do you navigate all of that?
Sure, and I think the way, especially as a state broadband office and someone who has been a lifelong bureaucrat, I apologize everyone, but that's been my job my entire adult life. One of the things to think about is that there are 2 kind of buckets, right? Like when we think about how are we going to use the internet and what are we going to do with it? Like as a state person, as someone who's at a government level, there are 2 different ways to look at this. The first way is, how do we help the industry to create the things that will help us do and solve these problems, right? So here's a good example. In the state of Ohio, we have a corridor along Route 33. It goes from downtown Columbus. It goes all the way out to a place called the Transportation Research Center. It is the largest independent automotive research center in the United States. It holds the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's crash tests location and has an entire autonomous and connected vehicle wing, right? I used to work for Drive Ohio. I used to actually help with autonomous connected vehicles in the state of Ohio. And one of the things that most connected vehicles need is the ability to connect to the internet. So along Route 30, we created a corridor. That corridor allows anyone who wants to be able to test out a vehicle that connects to our intelligent transportation network, and then use that network to have that car stay connected and then run AI, run predictive programs or anything else. So we in the state went, I have no idea what you cool people are going to come up with on how to solve problems. Go figure it out. And Honda was able to demo and has demoed smart merging technology where the car can actually anticipate whether or not it is safe to merge as it is coming down an off-ramp, and it can interrupt the driver to prevent an accident. These same things can be used to make sure people don't go on wrong ways when they're coming down a highway, because I can tell you, from an ITS perspective, the moment a wrong way begins, it is just a matter of time before someone dies, because wrong way collisions result in death, because when 2 cars hit each other going 65 miles per hour, someone in that collision isn't going to survive. And so we can use corridors like the one I'm talking about to help test out that software that allows people to go like, well, this is how we can anticipate that someone's going to go a wrong way. This is how we can notify people that someone's going a wrong way. This is how we can predict traffic patterns that will occur once someone goes a wrong way, so we can make a safe corridor before that person can be pulled over. So that's the one half of it. And then the other half of it is to implement things that have been tested out. So the other half of it is to work with, again, going with Aging in Place, to work with the Department of Aging, to work with the Department of Medicaid, to go like, hey, what are the newest and greatest things? And sometimes when we see those things, we go, good, let's have a pilot program, let's have a conversation about testing it out in a small area to make sure that it works. And so in that instance, in Ohio, again, we have in Monroe County, we have one of the largest single county school districts in the state. It encompasses 8 different school buildings, and each of those buildings is roughly an hour away from the other. And in that entire school district, they only had 2 behavioral health therapists. So if a child was in crisis, they had to wait an hour for a therapist to get there to evaluate them, and then it was a 2.5-hour drive to the nearest children's behavioral health pavilion. So that's a 4-hour-ish wait before a child began in crisis and had all that time to escalate before they actually arrived at a place that could help treat them. So what we did was we created telehealth compartments or places to go inside of each of those buildings. When a child presents in crisis in any one building, they are connected to a behavioral health therapist in 60 seconds, evaluated, and can begin the transportation to the children's hospital right that minute if it's decided that they actually need to have an intervention, right? And so in just doing that, because we knew that was an effective technology that already existed, we've seen behavioral health incidents decrease. We've seen absences decrease, right? We've seen increased participation in class and a decrease in absences. So on the one side, we had I have no idea how to make transportation safer, so we're just going to build the infrastructure to help you figure it out. And on the other side, we knew that creating telehealth spaces in each of the schools had a way to help with behavioral health issues, and we're able to implement it. So from my perspective, it's always the state's job to decide as we're looking at trying to help people age in place or receive behavioral health therapies or be safe on the road, is to make that decision of like, do we think it's a proved out technology? Then great, then let's find a place to pilot it to show that the implementation works before we make it go bigger. And if it's one of those where like, we're not quite sure yet whether this is gonna work, then we're like, good, then we'll create the safe space where people can test it so that we can then bring it to the stage where we pilot it out and make sure that it works.
Yeah, that's great. And Brandy, to you, I mean, when you think about, you know, beyond what Peter was describing there and sort of intelligent infrastructure within, you know, sort of mass scale infrastructure, what do you see as the opportunities, you know, for us to actually go from a network plus you know, a national infrastructure to an intelligent network and a national infrastructure?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's kind of taking what Peter said and kind of zooming up, zooming out. You know, the state of Colorado, you know, we think in order to enable, you know, the technology that's emerging. I mean, I think with government, it's always really hard, where we're always kind of behind, you know, the innovations, and we have to play this catch-up game. So most recently, even talking about policy and even on the national level, you know, in order to enable technology, leveraging AI, what we've decided as a state, and I'm part of the conversations, is working with industry and working with users of technology to put together a statewide framework for how to enable these technologies in a safe place. Because once you do that, you know, you can do those pilots, and industry has kind of the, I don't want to say guardrails, but just guidance from the state in terms of what's safe and what's not. And so recently we worked together with the National Governors Association, working with the utility providers, water users, our DOT, PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, to really figure out, well, what are the barriers for success for industry to innovate so that they can do more with tech and AI, and building that framework and not being so prescriptive that we prohibit certain technology that hasn't come to fruition yet. One example is like Waymo, right? This is a technology that is emerging, and you can see it in your cities. It's coming to Denver. We've had a few. I was mind blown about it. I was like, oh my God, that car does not have a driver in it. Who approved that, you know? And so, and you know, from a consumer, you look at that, and it's really scary, right? And so, you know, as policymakers and people, you know, bureaucrats in government, we really have to work with industry to figure out, to create those parameters for them to be successful. We have tried a couple of times to put some frameworks in place from a legislative perspective around AI and governance of AI and safety, and how do we leverage it. And what we're hoping now, because those attempts haven't been really that successful, because again, it's new, and we're testing these things out, and there's definitely a fear about it. So we've gone back to the drawing board and saying, okay, well, maybe what's first is not jumping to a national or statewide legislative approach. Because when you're really legislating from behind, you have to keep going back and tweaking it to keep up with technology. So now what we're doing is, instead, we're putting frameworks in place for industry, but also the communities around how this technology works, with their voice in mind, and providing technical assistance and support, and toolkits, and you know, just that support that communities need to really start those local implementations, before they become, you know, a bigger thing, and people, you know, put the kibosh on it because they don't understand it or we haven't communicated it. So Colorado's at the very beginning stages of that, but we're really excited, and I think we have a lot of participation from our private sector partners, but it definitely is a partnership.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, I was going to come to you on this because, you know, I think the problem, like all good sales, you know, chief financial officers who are actually sales prevention officers, you don't want government actually to be in the way of progress. And the problem is that agentic AI is moving at a prolific rate, and of course it does introduce greater degrees of autonomy in you know, systems of decision making. So practically speaking, and I think you wanted to add something on there, but with this question, you know, how does actually the industry move forward without being held back, and how, you know, what are the practical steps that need to be taken so that we can move forward with agentic systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just echo what Brandy was also saying about how do you manage that process as you're testing, evaluating, whether it's Waymo or Zoox or May, or there's a dozen different companies out there. We've actually partnered with the district's Department of Transportation to test and evaluate sensors downtown DC. So as that Waymo is operating, then the city will be able to test and evaluate in real time, is that vehicle operating as advertised? Is it going down the wrong way? They're going to report out on other crashes, but not near misses. So how many near misses are they not reporting, or other challenges that they're running into, whether it's Waymo or any of them, to test and evaluate, so that as DDOT and Maryland and Virginia, that whole region begins to evaluate the legislative approach to whether or not allowing Waymo to operate and charge for their service, that becomes an important part of that data analysis, that framework that we're going to be doing. It becomes an important part of that work. Another good example is out in the city of San Jose. So they've got a Vision Zero strategy that they have set up. Right now, people are just typing it into 311. They're calling in. They see a crack in the pavement. Somebody calls in because they have a bike accident, another accident as they're commuting to work. And what they're looking to do is automate that whole process of taking sensors, whether cameras, other sensors, deploying them into city fleet vehicles, and then monitoring the roadways in real time to say, well, we need to repair the road here, or somebody put a giant couch in the middle of or some pile of trash, other things in the middle of the roadway. Right? There's a lot of pedestrian accidents on the way to work every morning. How do you begin to identify the lives saved because of these tools, and then scaling that up, not just in San Jose, but across the whole region in Northern California is definitely the long-term goal of that effort.
It's quite fascinating, isn't it? And I think you sort of allude to another point, really, which is you probably have to start measuring the way in which you would measure innovation, the way that you would measure the effectiveness of these different systems probably has to change quite significantly as well. So, Peter, as you think forward to how do we measure differently, and also how do we decide when humans actually come into the loop? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think government always struggles to keep up with innovation, right? And government struggles to put effective guardrails on innovation, and government struggles to know how to hold people accountable for innovation, right? I mean, I think we see a lot of times where, I've been at conferences where one of the questions is like, okay, well, if the Waymo gets into an accident, who's in trouble, right? There wasn't a person. Who do you give a ticket to, right? And for many of these, there's someone like in an office that's looking at 40 screens for 40 Waymos. Is that the person who got the ticket? Does that person need to have a driver's license? Does that person need to have insurance? How do you insure that, right? And I know that sounds kind of like, oh, that's just really annoying. And the answer is, yeah, it is 100% annoying. I'm a lawyer, guys. I'm annoying. That's what I do, right? I'm actually the worst kind of attorney. I used to be a tax attorney before I started doing this. So trust me, I'm like the worst kind of lawyer, right? But it is an issue. It's an issue of like, how do we do this? And I think, and like I said before, going back to kind of my bucket example, right? I think on the one side, when we're trying to do innovation, right? So we'll take Waymo. Like, so in the state of Ohio, we had May Mobility was one of the autonomous vehicle that we used in downtown Columbus. My claim to fame is that we are the first city in this country that actually had an autonomous and connected vehicle on mixed-use traffic. It did not have a designated lane. It was all by itself, going out in mixed-use traffic. And in that sense, so what we did there was the governor was like, we created an executive order, we put guardrails around that, and because the Department of Transportation helped fund the contract, we were able to say like, well, we want to see what these guardrails are. We could get information as the state to say like, how was it going and things like that, because that was one of those times in that bucket where it was like, we don't know if this is going to work, so let's all work together in a partnership, like you were saying, Brandy, and like, how do we put this on the street? How do we all work together to make sure it's working? And how do we make sure that at the end of the day it was the most boring project ever because it never got into an accident, which is literally what happened, And so it was very safe and effective because we all worked together, right? And then how do we do that? And then making that distinction between another project for ITS where we had a school district, and the school district had an entrance and an egress that were way too close to each other, and both of them had stoplights. And so in that situation, we had traffic that was piling up for miles because people were trying to turn in and the stoplight didn't go long enough, and then people would be caught in the road, and then it would block traffic. And literally it was using AI to go, okay, how about we just have AI monitor how long everything's getting, and whether keeping the traffic light running for longer would allow traffic to just move better, right? And so in that instance, we really didn't need to regulate it or put guardrails on it, because it was like, well, no, this is something that we know is going to work and it doesn't really need to be tested. We can just implement it and allow it to solve a problem. And that's why I say, like, I think the really important thing, especially when we're talking about partnerships and like how we're going to use AI, is to be like, okay, well, is this something where that we're not quite sure how it's going to work. We know it's going to have a benefit, but we're not sure, like, if it gets into a crash, there's a whole bunch of legal problems. I think that's the bucket, like I said, of like, okay, that's like the testing bucket where you go, okay, let's all work together, let's form a partnership, because then that way, as these legal problems come up, we're all in it together going, okay, then how do we think we should handle this? Versus the, hey, you know what? We know that AI can monitor someone's in-home devices and be predictive and say, hey, this person didn't take a shower this morning, didn't open their refrigerator, and they haven't left their bed. That means that in this person's case, the likelihood is that something is happening, you need to go get them, right? Like in those instances, I think the human benefit and the risk to the public is so much lower that you go, okay, let's just implement that, see how well we can get that to work, and then expand it to other places. So.
Yeah, and very interesting, in fact. And Peter, there's a lot of complexity. Sorry, not Peter, Nick. There's a lot of complexity in all of these, systems of innovation. And maybe if you can share a few, comments on where you've compared and contrasted different systems of innovation and what were the effective, practical things that people did that showed that, maybe a system A was actually better at innovating than system B because whatever motivational factors were in place.
Yeah, I would say it's a huge challenge just coordinating within one city government or one county government or one state government, and then you add in the local university, the local startup accelerator, the local other nonprofits, other stakeholders to that conversation. This is a vital part of that regional or community innovation that strategy that has to be developed, and that is frankly, a multi-month process to get everyone on board and in agreement on what are the key priorities, what are the specific activities that we want to focus in on, and then thinking through, well, what are the funding opportunities or other support mechanisms that we need. So this isn't just a strategy that sits on a shelf, but we can actually start to implement it. And we might need to do one or two of these pilots to start, like Peter was saying with the main mobility pilot. But how do we grow towards that long-term vision, still keeping all those different stakeholders engaged and supportive along the way? And that is the real challenging part of it, especially when you have a new governor or mayor or somebody else move in, or a CTO or local champion gets a new job, they got the dream job.
And had broadband.
And yes, and so then how do you still work with those folks to execute? That's the huge challenge of it, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think the participation problem is massive, and I've tried to set up systems of innovation, and as soon as you start to try to do them on a very, very long-term basis without a definable sort of outcome, then people will commit to it. But like you say, as soon as somebody changes job or money turns off or a new executive comes in that says, I don't really understand why we're doing this, it all switches off really quickly. You've got systems of innovation within enterprises, and they are often motivated to want to do that. But Brandy, communities aren't motivated in the same way. Yeah, they come at it from a very different perspective. So perhaps you can share some examples of how you've seen successful community engagement within any kind of systems like this.
Yeah, so, I have seen, approaches that work and approaches that fall flat. And, if you don't have the public support, it's really hard to move any sort of innovation forward. And especially with new technology that people are not used to, that, there's definitely viral videos on Instagram and, the zombie apocalypse sort of thing. I think those are fringe cases of when things don't work out. But one of the things that I have found successful, and especially in the context of like AI, like you talked a little bit earlier about when do you keep a human in the loop, I think for communities, for the most part, that's what they're asking. They're asking for like responsible and ethical use of AI technology. And so, and to your point, Nick, there's different industry SMEs around AI. There's, like you listed a bunch out. And I think what the public really needs is they need to know, and they need to feel comfortable that there's somebody keeping an eye on them, And so to the extent that AI companies do that, whether you're constructing a data center or you're introducing, AI technology into like a school district. I mean, when AI came out, I have a ton of teacher friends. They were terrified of AI. And you have to kind of give the communities guidance for how to use it to benefit and further their work. Because it's always around what is the public benefit for industry to make investments, to operate in these communities. And communities really need to know that. And so, even with, we're talking about like the flock cameras now. That's a whole thing that's happening as well. And I think if you got to get ahead of the message. You cannot wait for it to get out there and kind of blow up. And I think as policymakers and industry folks, like before you roll it out, you have to really spend some time on the front end educating communities on what they are, what's happening. And so even with Waymo, and I would even in my work, I've usually invited subject matter experts from the community, especially those people that tend to be the loudest voice in the room. And it's not you, Peter, I promise. And we love Peter. So you really have to invite those people in that are skeptical or cautiously optimistic to make them part of the conversation, because then they'll be champions for your products. And then really, beef up that, that public benefit piece of the benefit for the public, so they actually buy into it. I think those are the most successful approaches. I used to be in local government, and I would see industry come in and pretty much drop a bomb, and nobody's heard of it, and public just goes, they just don't love it. And so the most successful projects are the ones where you engage way ahead of time, and you beef up that public benefit, and you show some pilots and some real world examples from other communities that are doing it, because a lot of communities are looking at each other, and there's a little bit of healthy competition. You don't want to be left out, but I do think that it makes a big difference when you do that.
Excellent, thanks. So we've covered a lot of topics about some of the practical things, the conditions for success and systems of innovation around AI and networks and observability and performance metrics and lots of things. Let's now lift it up. We've got about 6 minutes left. You're 5 years out from now. We've actually not only got AI, and we've got network technology, and we've got dynamic usage of the network, but we've still been stagnating around $2 trillion, and now we're going to add quantum into the mix for extra fun. Yeah, what does the future hold for us, Peter? Where's the new opportunity, come from, and help us to get out of this $2 trillion ceiling that we're at right now?
I don't know. I mean, I think that. There's an idea out there that says that every 10 years there's going to be a technological revolution and we won't know what it is until it's over, right? And so if you look, right, computing kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so everybody thought like, oh, well, the computers were going to get bigger, and that's how we're going to get bigger. And then the microchip revolution happened, and then computers became smaller, right? And then similarly, right, we saw everybody having personal computers, and then the phone revolution happens. The cellular phone revolution happens, and that took us all off guard. Right now, in 2026, we're in the midst of whatever the next technological revolution is. And right now, I can tell you, I'm not sure what it is. It might be AI, right? It might be quantum. I don't know which of those are going to be the next big thing that change our lives, but it's going to be something, right? And so I think from my perspective, 5 years from now, what we're trying to do is go like, look, maybe it's AI, maybe it's quantum, maybe it's something that someone's working on in a garage right now that we haven't even figured out. And from my perspective in government, it's to go like, okay, well, how do I make sure that no matter what the next thing is, right, that we've made sure that, one, we could foster its development in a safe way, right, and two, we've made those people feel like they can innovate and continue to innovate without interruption and without interference, right? And I know that's a delicate balance, right? Because as a government official, we're super reactive, if you remember a couple of years ago when an autonomous vehicle hit and killed a woman in Arizona, right? Every single state from that point on was like, not for me, because, we very much in government are reactive. And that's why I say, the more we can work together to say, well, whatever the next big thing is, working with the government, not local, state, federal, whatever it is, just so we're all understanding where we're trying to go, means that when that first hiccup happens, right? AI is already accidentally hacking other AIs, right? People aren't going to be happy about that, right? So what I'm saying is that the more we can work together and be like, okay, well, why did that happen? Let's explain it. Help government officials understand that they don't need to react to that because we're all working together. I think that's how we're going to foster the environment necessary so that we can 5 years from now be like, oh yeah, you know what it was? It was insert whatever.
Thanks, Nick. Do you see things then potentially 5 years from now as being much more federated data and AI infrastructure? Do you see the use cases being more prolific, edge-based, or do you still think we're fantasizing around that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think that we keep going back to the autonomous vehicle example, right? It's the most obvious one. But in 2016, when all those companies were launching, they said, well, we're going to be around the country in 5 years. Now, 10 years later, they're still not there. Now they're growing rapid again today. But quantum, AI, all these other tools that you've been mentioning may take a lot longer than that 5-year time frame that industry is banking on right now.
And maybe not. I mean, look how fast AI is actually growing. Yeah. What are your thoughts then, Brandy?
So I've been in government my whole career as well, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with a lot of private sector partners, and I do feel like we're definitely on this path of we're going to see a major disruption, technology disruption that's going to completely innovate the next 10 years. When that happens, I don't know. Because AI, we've been talking about AI for a while, and even where we were 5 years ago as broadband officers and just as a country, we went from we're not going to have enough bead glass to do broadband to where, all the bead glass went to AI data centers, and so, it just makes you appreciate the level of fluidity and urgency around different tech. And what my approach has always been is you got to live in the past, present, and future. The past is like, okay, there's some examples where things didn't go well, so don't do that again. Present, you still have to support the industry as it's emerging. And then in the future, you got to operate in a way that you're not so prescriptive. And I feel like in government, we are so prescriptive. And there's one bad example, and that example lives for 30 years, and it really stifles that innovation. So whenever I've had an opportunity to work with industry, with other policymakers, I make very sure that when we're coming up with ideas that we're not ruling anything out. That might be too much of an open book for some people, especially in government. But I usually lean in, let them innovate. Yes, we're going to be behind, but at least we're letting them get started so that we're not an impediment to success, because I feel like industry has some of the best ideas, and communities benefit significantly from it. So I really don't love the prescriptive future approach, more prescriptive looking back, but keeping the door open for what can come through the door in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I love that. I think, just for what it's worth, my assumption is that actually the greater the autonomy in the system of decision making around the software that's actually being deployed, the greater the need is for low latency, high performance networks. So if you've got anything that requires anything below sub 6 millisecond, and that's an autonomous agent that's going to make a decision, and that decision is going to then transact in near real time or real time, I think that's actually where you will start to see the value, because that's a different type of value that we've not seen that today. You don't care if your Netflix session takes a couple of seconds to start up. You don't need it to set it. But if you see agency and autonomy working at massive systems, and I think that's exactly where I think that's where the money is going forward. So, burning questions from anybody here? Well, that's just as well, because 2 of us need to make a flight. So on that note, thanks very much, everybody, for joining the session, and thanks, everybody, here for participating.